My name is Renee Marie Caldwell. I am 34 years old. I am a licensed clinical social worker at Novant Health Presbyterian Medical Center in Charlotte, North Carolina, which means I spend most of my working days helping people navigate the worst moments of their lives: crisis interventions, discharge planning, sickness patients in the hours after a diagnosis, and helping them figure out what the road ahead even looks like when everything they thought was solid has dissolved under their feet. I tell you that because I need you to understand something about me before I tell you the rest of this. I am professionally trained in grief. I know the stages. I have held space for 80-year-old men who just lost their wives of 52 years. I have sat across the table from women who just lost children, and I did not look away. I am not someone who comes apart easily, and I still barely made it through March 14th, 2023. That was the day I sat in a leather chair in Gerald Whitmore's law office on Glenwood Avenue in Raleigh, surrounded by every living member of the Caldwell family, and listened to him read my grandmother's will out loud. Evelyn May Caldwell, 81 years old when she died. The woman who taught me to make cornbread from scratch in her kitchen on Oberlin Road when I was 7 years old, standing on a step stool so I could reach the counter. The woman who called me every single Sunday at exactly 11 in the morning for 23 straight years, without missing 1 week, even after her hands got so stiff with arthritis that dialing the phone caused her actual pain. The woman who tucked $20 bills into birthday cards with a note in her slanted cursive that said, "Don't spend it on anything sensible." Gerald Whitmore read through the assets slowly, the way estate attorneys do when they understand that every word they're speaking is rearranging someone's understanding of the world. The house on Oberlin Road, appraised at $412,000. The savings account at First Citizens Bank with a balance of $89,000. The furniture, the jewelry, the 2019 Toyota Camry with 22,000 miles on it, the personal effects. I heard my name exactly once in that entire reading. To my granddaughter, Renee Caldwell, I leave my collection of recipe cards and the cast iron skillet that belonged to my mother. That was it. Recipe cards and a cast iron skillet. Everything else, the house, the bank account, the car, the diamond earrings my grandfather gave Evelyn on their 20th anniversary, the mahogany dining set that had been in that Oberlin Roadhouse for 38 years, it all went to my Aunt Patricia Hargrove and her children, Bryce and Ashley. I did not cry in that room. I found a water stain on the drop ceiling, a brownish ring about the size of a dinner plate in the upper left corner, and I fixed my eyes on it, and I breathed through my nose, and I did not make a single sound. And then Gerald Whitmore cleared his throat and looked up from his document and said, "If the rest of the family could give us just a few minutes. Renee, I'd like you to stay behind, please. There's something I need to discuss with you privately. Before I tell you what happened when everyone else walked out of that room, I want you to do something for me. Hit like if any part of what I just said landed somewhere real. Leave a comment and tell me where you are watching this from and what time it is right there where you are. I genuinely want to know." I read every single comment. I always have. Okay, now let me take you back because to understand what happened in that room with Gerald Whitmore, you need to understand Evelyn May Caldwell. And to understand Evelyn, you need to understand the family she raised and the cracks that ran through it for decades before anyone was willing to name them. I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina. My dad, Douglas Caldwell, everybody who knows him calls him Doug, is 61 years old. He spent 32 years as a mean caregiver for the USPS before his left knee gave out in 2021, and he took early retirement. My mom, Linda, is 58. She has worked the deli counter at the Harris Teeter on Battleground Avenue for 19 years, and she knows every regular customer by their full name and their usual order, and she genuinely means it when she asks how they're doing. They are not wealthy people. They are deeply good people who built a comfortable life with steady hands and no shortcuts, paid off their 3-bedroom house in 2019, and chose contentment the way other people choose ambition. I have nothing but respect for that choice. Evelyn was my father's mother. She had two children, my dad, Douglas, and his younger sister, Patricia, Aunt Patty to those of us who wanted to stay on her good side. They grew up in Raleigh. My grandfather, Charles Caldwell, died of a sudden heart attack in 1989 when Doug was 27 and Patty was 25. Evelyn never remarried. She said Charles had spoiled her for other men, which she delivered as a compliment, and which was probably also just the truth that she liked running her own house, making her own decisions, living inside her own rhythms. Patty married Raymond Hargrove in 1991. Raymond is a commercial real estate developer. He and Patty built a very comfortable life in the Stonehenge subdivision in North Raleigh. 5 bedrooms, a pool, 3-car garage, white Range Rover in the driveway. Their children, Bryce and Ashley, went to Ravenscroft School from kindergarten through 12th grade. Bryce is 31 now. Ashley is 28. My dad drove a Honda CR-V and sent me to Pine Grove Middle School. I want to say clearly that I did not grow up resentful of my cousins. I want to be honest about that because it matters for everything that comes after. I understood early that we were different kinds of families. I knew Bryce's birthday parties had inflatable bouncy castles, and mine had a sheet cake from the Food Lion Bakery. I knew that Ravenscroft and Pine Grove were not the same world, but my parents were very deliberate about the lesson they taught me. Money is not a measure of love. They said it plainly, they lived it plainly, and it took. I believed it. I still do. Evelyn loved both her children. I believe that without reservation. But Patty was, and I want to choose this word carefully because I have spent a lot of time in therapy working toward precision. Patty was a woman who understood leverage. She lived 20 minutes from her mother. My dad lived 90 minutes away in Greensboro. Proximity, in families like ours, translates to influence over time. Patty was the one who bought Evelyn groceries, who drove her to her hair appointments at the salon on Hillsborough Street she'd gone to for 20 years, who sat at Evelyn's kitchen table every Sunday afternoon with a mug of coffee and a running list of things that needed attention around the house. Patty was present in ways my dad simply could not be, and presence is a kind of power that nobody names until it starts to be used. I loved my grandmother deeply and specifically, in the way you love someone you have actually talked to, rather than just admired from a distance. From the time I was small, Evelyn and I had a relationship that felt like it belonged to just the two of us. She called me her Sunday girl because I was born on a Sunday and because Sunday was our day. I'd tell her about school, about my friends, about the boy I liked in 8th grade, who never once looked at me, about college applications, about the graduate social work program I was deciding between. She'd tell me about Charles, about what Raleigh looked like in the 1960s, about marching with a group of women down Fayetteville Street in 1970, demanding equal pay while her mother stayed home and prayed nobody saw her on the news. She told that story like it was the best thing she'd ever done. She was probably right. When I got into UNC Chapel Hill on a partial scholarship in 2007, Evelyn wept. Genuinely wept, sitting in her kitchen on Oberlin Road while I held the phone. My dad was proud in his steady, quiet way. He hugged me for a long time without saying much, which from Douglas Caldwell is equivalent to a standing ovation. But Evelyn cried and said, "Your grandfather would have given anything to see this day." And then she put $300 cash in a card and mailed it to my parents' house with a note that said, "Don't spend it on anything sensible." I bought textbooks. She would have understood. Bryce Hargrove, meanwhile, was the golden grandchild in every public sense. He was handsome in a broad, easy way, 6 feet tall. Ravenscroft lacrosse captain, the kind of boy who takes up room without noticing he's doing it. He went to Wake Forest on his parents' money, majored in business administration, came home and slid straight into Raymond's commercial real estate company like a key into a lock that had been cut specifically for him. Evelyn adored him. I genuinely don't think she loved him more than me. I have turned that question over many times and I truly don't believe it. But Aunt Patty was masterful at manufacturing visible moments of grandmotherly devotion. She photographed Bryce and Evelyn together constantly, printed the photos, framed them. She'd bring Bryce to fix things around Evelyn's house: a loose porch railing, a leaking kitchen faucet, a window screen that had slipped, and Evelyn would tell everyone about it for weeks afterward. My grandson fixed my screen door. He's so capable. She said it like it was the most remarkable thing that had happened to her. I was fixing things, too. I was driving up from wherever I was living, Chapel Hill during college, then Greensboro during my MSW program at UNCG, then Charlotte after I was hired at Novant in 2014, and I was making that drive up I-85 and sitting at Evelyn's kitchen table and asking real questions and listening to real answers and calling every Sunday without fail. But I wasn't in the photographs. I wasn't the shiny object. I was just the consistent one. Let me stop here for a second, because I know someone watching this right now is nodding at their screen. If you grew up with a Bryce, not necessarily a cousin, maybe a sibling, a nephew, a neighbor's kid, anyone who got full credit for showing up twice while you showed up every single time and stayed invisible, I want you to drop a comment right now. Just write, "I had a Bryce," that's all. Because more of us have had one than anyone ever admits, and I think naming it is the beginning of understanding why it hurts so much. The shift happened in September of 2019. Evelyn had what her doctors at WakeMed called a TIA, a transient ischemic attack. A small stroke. She was 77. It didn't cause visible lasting damage, but it frightened everyone, and it changed her in ways that were harder to see than a dropped foot or a slurred word. She became more tentative, tired in a new way. She started having trouble managing her blood pressure medications. She was on 4 different prescriptions, and the coordination of them was genuinely complicated. And she got confused sometimes about timing and whether she'd already taken something. I started driving up from Charlotte on the 3rd Sunday of every month, 2.5 hours each way, on top of our Sunday calls. I'd arrive around noon, make lunch, sit with her through the afternoon, go through her weekly medication organizer to make sure everything was stocked and correctly sequenced, help her communicate with Dr. Nathaniel Osie's office when she needed someone to translate between patient language and medical language. Dr. Osie had been Evelyn's primary care physician for 11 years. He was good. He knew her history. She trusted him. I did this for 3 years, 36 trips. I have the mileage records in a Google spreadsheet, and I am not someone who exaggerates. Patty was present too, and I want to be fair about that. In the beginning, it felt like we were both showing up in different ways, and it was working. But there was a shift. I'd place it in early 2021, where something in Patty's approach changed. She stopped being a devoted daughter and started being a manager. She managed Evelyn. She made decisions about Evelyn's healthcare and household without consulting my dad or me. She moved Evelyn's financial documents, the manila folders that had lived in the kitchen filing cabinet since I was a child, to what she called a safe place at her own house. She started accompanying Evelyn to doctor's appointments and calling ahead to ask that I not come along, because having too many people in the room confused Evelyn. She switched Evelyn's primary care from Dr. Osie to a new practice in North Raleigh, closer to Patty's house, with a physician Evelyn had never met. I raised these things with my dad. He heard me. He nodded. He said, "Your aunt just wants to help Renee. She's doing the best she can," and I let it go because I had been trained in the quiet, cumulative way families train you without ever saying the words out loud, not to make waves. Not to be the difficult one, to give people the benefit of the doubt until the doubt ran out. In the spring of 2021, Evelyn mentioned to me almost in passing that she'd been to see a new attorney. She said Patty had taken her to update her affairs. She seemed calm about it, or she was performing calm for my benefit. I have thought about that distinction many times since. She said, "Everything's taken care of, Sunday girl." I asked if she'd had the chance to review everything herself, if her own independent counsel had looked at it. She said Patty had found someone very helpful. I asked for the attorney's name. She couldn't remember it. I sat with that information for 2 weeks. Then I drove to Charlotte's South End and paid $350 for a consultation with Catherine Lowe at Lowe and Reeves, an estate attorney I found through a colleague at Novant. I described everything to Catherine. Patty's increasing control, the documents moved, the restricted access, the new attorney Evelyn couldn't name. Catherine said carefully that what I was describing was consistent with what she'd seen in undue influence situations, but without reviewing the actual documents, she couldn't say anything definitive. She advised me to document everything I could and to keep showing up. I never saw the documents. Patty made sure of that. From mid-2021 through Evelyn's death in January 2023, my access to my grandmother was reduced in the gradual, deniable way that is almost impossible to fight, because there's never a single clear line you can point to. My Sunday calls continued. Evelyn insisted on those, and I am grateful for that until I run out of days. But when I drove to Raleigh, there was almost always something arranged to be happening. A family lunch at Patty's house that nobody had mentioned. Bryce visiting. A follow-up appointment that had tired Evelyn out. Over 18 months, I went from seeing my grandmother once a month to seeing her 4 times total. The last time I saw her in person was October 2022, in her kitchen on Oberlin Road. She was 80 years old. She held my hand across the table, both of her stiff hands wrapped around mine, and she looked at me with an expression I have gone back to 10,000 times since. Careful. Deliberate. Like she was setting something down somewhere safe. She said, "I need you to know that I see you, Renee. I see exactly who you are. I thought it was an old woman being sentimental. I was wrong." Evelyn May Caldwell died on January 19th, 2023. She passed in her sleep at home on Oberlin Road. Peacefully, Patty told us. Surrounded by family, she said, which was her way of saying surrounded by her family. I was not there. I found out at 6:47 in the morning when my phone rang, and it was my dad, and I heard him breathing differently before he said a single word, and I knew. I drove to Raleigh alone. Marcus, my boyfriend, Marcus Webb, 36, an accountant, the most level-headed human being I have ever been lucky enough to be loved by, offered to come. I told him not to. There are drives you have to make by yourself. Have you ever done everything right, shown up consistently, done the invisible work, loved someone completely and without an agenda, and still found yourself holding nothing that anyone could see? And I don't mean just money. I mean the acknowledgement, the recognition, the simple confirmation that it registered somewhere, that it mattered to somebody. Leave me a comment if you know that feeling. I'll read every single one. The funeral was February 4th, 2023, at Mount Zion First Baptist Church on Oberlin Road, 3 blocks from Evelyn's house. The church she'd attended for 43 years. 312 people came because I counted them. I know that number because I was the one standing at the entrance handing out programs, while Aunt Patty sat in the front family pew in a black dress that cost more than my monthly rent. I gave the eulogy. Patty had written one, and I had written one, and the night before the service we compared them at the kitchen table in Evelyn's house. Patty's was full of elevated phrases. A pillar of the community, devoted matriarch, legacy of service, the kind of language that could have described almost anyone if you changed the name at the top. Mine was about cornbread, about some phone calls that happened without fail for 23 years, about a march down Fayetteville Street in 1970 and a mother who nearly had a stroke finding out about it, about the exact sound of Evelyn's laugh, which lived somewhere between a hiccup and a small song, and which I have never heard duplicated by another human being. My dad looked at both versions and said quietly, "Renee should do this one." Patty's mouth went flat. She disagreed. We did mine anyway. It was the last thing I won for a long time. Gerald Whitmore's office, March 14th, 2023. 6 weeks after the funeral, there were 8 people in the room. Me, my dad, and my mom, Aunt Patty, Raymond Hargrove, Bryce Ashley, and my uncle Ronnie Caldwell. My dad's younger brother, 54, who drove up from Fayetteville more out of family obligation. than any expectation of inheritance. Gerald Whitmore was a tall man, mid to late 60s, the kind of estate attorney who has wills in rooms full of tense families for so long that nothing visible registers on his face anymore. His office was wood-paneled, carpeted in deep burgundy, framed diplomas from UNC Chapel Hill and Campbell University School of Law on the wall behind his desk. There was a credenza with a crystal pitcher of water and 8 glasses. There was a box of tissues on the conference table that I initially thought was a courtesy, and later realized was a professional expectation. He read the will. The house on Oberlin Road, appraised at $412,000, to Patricia Hargrove. The savings account at First Citizens Bank, balance of $89,000, to Patricia Hargrove. The 2019 Toyota Camry to Bryce Hargrove. The diamond stud earrings Charles gave Evelyn on their 20th wedding anniversary to Ashley Hargrove. The mahogany dining room set to Patricia Hargrove. Personal effects to be distributed at Patricia Hargrove's discretion. To Douglas Caldwell. The pearl necklace that belonged to Evelyn's mother, to be given to the woman of his choosing. To Ronald Caldwell, Jr., the leather-bound King James Bible that belonged to Charles. To Renee Marie Caldwell, the collection of recipe cards and the cast-iron skillet that belonged to Evelyn's mother. I remember the sounds in that room when my portion was read. I remember the very careful stillness of Patty's face. I remember Bryce studying his fingernails with the focused attention of someone who needs somewhere to look. I remember my mom's hand finding my dad's forearm without either of them looking at each other. I remember that my dad went so rigid and so quiet that the quality of his silence changed the air in the room. I fixed my eyes on the water stain in the upper left corner of the drop ceiling, and I breathed through my nose. Recipe cards and a cast-iron skillet, after 36 drives. After 3 years of monthly trips, and medication organizers, and doctor's notes and Sunday calls that never missed a week for 2 decades. After 19 years of being Evelyn Caldwell's Sunday girl, recipe cards, and a skillet. Gerald Whitmore finished reading, folded the document with the efficiency of long practice, and looked around the room with the composed expression of a man who has watched families come apart across that table more times than he could usefully count. He said the estate would take approximately 90 days to close. He said he had paperwork for each party. He thanked everyone for their presence. And then he said it. If the rest of the family could give us just a few minutes. Renee, I'd like you to stay behind, please. There's something I need to discuss with you privately. Patty looked up fast. That was the tell, and I only caught it because I had spent 34 years learning the vocabulary of her face. She looked up fast, and the angle of her jaw shifted by a millimeter. Bryce glanced at his mother. Raymond studied the floor. My dad looked at me with an expression I couldn't read cleanly. Something between hope and warning, and something else I didn't have a name for yet. They filed out. Gerald Whitmore's assistant, a woman named Joyce who looked to be in her mid-50s and had clearly worked with him for years, closed the door behind the last person. Gerald set the estate file aside. He reached to the credenza behind him and retrieved a separate manila envelope, legal-sized, sealed, with my name written on it in handwriting I recognized before he had fully extended his arm. Evelyn's handwriting, the slanted cursive I had been reading my entire life. Renee Marie Caldwell, written carefully like she'd taken her time. I could not speak. Gerald Whitmore said, "Your grandmother came to see me privately on March 3rd, 2022. She came alone. She had my direct office number written on a notepad she had apparently kept in her bedroom. She called me herself to schedule the appointment, and she arrived by taxi because she did not want anyone in the family to know she was coming. I heard each word. I processed none of them in real time. They landed and sat there, waiting. She asked me to prepare a separate legal instrument, entirely independent of the will that had been arranged through the other attorney, and to hold it in our files until after her death and after the reading of the primary estate documents. She was very specific about the sequence. She wanted the will read first. She wanted you to hear it and understand the full situation before I gave you what she left with me. He paused. She wanted you to have the complete picture. He slid the manila envelope across the table. Inside was a letter. 6 pages of notebook paper, handwritten in Evelyn's slanted cursive, written in black ink with the deliberate pressure of someone who knows what they're putting down matters. And behind the letter, on Gerald Whitmore's firm letterhead, was a document establishing a Totten trust. A payable on death account, transfer outside of probate, in the name of Renee Marie Caldwell, held at Mechanics and Farmers Bank in Durham, North Carolina. The trust balance, as of the date of transfer, $147,000. I want to stop right here and ask you something. If you found out that the person who loved you most had been watching everything that was happening to you, all of it, quietly, while they were losing control of their own circumstances, and had been protecting you in the only way they still could, and you didn't find out until they were already gone, how would you describe that feeling? I have been trying to put a name to it for over a year, and I still don't have the right word. It's not just gratitude. It's not just grief. It's something in between those two things that doesn't have a clean label. If you know what I'm trying to describe, leave it in the comments. I need the right word. I sat in that office for a long time after Gerald finished explaining. Joyce brought water. She brought a second box of tissues from somewhere in the back. Nicer tissues, I noticed. The way your brain notices irrelevant small things when the large things are too enormous to hold directly. And she set them beside me, without comment, and left again, which was exactly right. I read the letter, all 6 pages. Sitting in that burgundy-carpeted office with the afternoon light, laying thin stripes through the blinds across the floor, I read every word my grandmother had written for me. She began by apologizing for the theater of it. She wrote that she understood how it would feel to sit through that reading and hear what the will said, and she was sorry for the pain of those minutes. But she needed me to understand the difference between what was written in that document and who she actually was. She needed me to know the difference with certainty, not just with hope. She wrote about Patty, not with contempt. That wasn't Evelyn, it never was. She wrote with the quiet, wearied clarity of a woman who had loved her daughter with her whole heart for 57 years and had spent the last 4 watching that daughter do something she couldn't reconcile. She used the word managing. Patty had become managing, she wrote, and over time managing had become something else, something that she had no kind word for. New doctor who didn't know her history. New attorney she'd never chosen herself. Documents moved to a safe place that Evelyn couldn't access. Visits from her son and her granddaughter increasingly redirected and delayed. She wasn't oblivious. She was 80 years old with a body that had slowed down but a mind that was still entirely her own. And she watched what was happening with clear eyes, and she was afraid to resist it directly, because she was dependent on Patty in ways she hadn't been before the TIA, and resistance risked the care she needed to stay in her own home. But she had resources Patty didn't know existed. When my grandfather Charles died in 1989, there was a small whole life insurance policy, $30,000, that had been paid directly to Evelyn. She had never mentioned it to anyone. She'd placed it into a savings account at Mechanics and Farmers Bank in Durham, an HBCU-affiliated institution her own father had banked with, which she had maintained her entire adult life completely, separate from the household accounts everyone knew about. Over the following decades, that $30,000 had grown, and she had added to it, quietly, steadily, from savings and tax returns and the places you find money when you're careful and patient. By 2019, it was sitting at $89,000 in that Mechanics and Farmers account, and nobody on earth but Evelyn knew it was there. After her TIA, she had contacted Gerald Whitmore on her own and established the Totten Trust in my name. Over the following 40 months, she transferred the entire Mechanics and Farmers savings account into it. She supplemented it with careful, modest amounts skimmed from her monthly Social Security check, $1,142 one month, $150 the next, depositing directly into the trust account. She did this for over 3 years, methodically, quietly, from inside a situation where someone else was managing nearly every other aspect of her life. $147,000. Built in secret. Meant for me. She wrote, I saved it for you because I knew you would know what to do with it. And because I needed you to know that I was watching. I was always watching. I saw every drive up from Charlotte and every medication organizer and every Sunday call. I kept a list, Renee, of every time, every visit, every errand you ran without being asked. I kept it in the recipe card box, the one I left you in the will, because I knew nobody would look there. The recipe card box, I had left it at Patty's house. After the reading, in the fog of what I just heard, Patty had offered to hold on to everything until we can get you sorted, and I had let her take the box with a handful of other small items because I was not thinking clearly. I had handed her the one thing Evelyn most needed me to have. I called my dad from Gerald Whitmore's parking lot. He picked up on the first ring, which told me he had been sitting in his car waiting for me to come out. I told him everything. He was quiet for a long time, the particular quiet that comes before something important. Then he said, Renee, go get that box. I drove to Patty's house in the Stonehenge subdivision in North Raleigh. The drive was 40 minutes. I made it in 32. I rang the doorbell. It took Patty 4 minutes to answer, which was long enough that I understood she was deciding. She opened the door. Her expression was a careful arrangement of concern and suspicion. The face of a woman who knows something has changed, but hasn't confirmed the dimensions of it yet. I said, I need my grandfather's recipe card box, Patty, she said. Of course, sweetheart. I was going to bring everything to you. I just haven't had the chance. I said, right now, please. She got the box, the green tin with the faded roses on the lid, probably from the early 1970s. I had held it 100 times as a child. It lived on the second shelf of Evelyn's kitchen cabinet, between the cornmeal and the canning jars, for as long as I could remember. I took it. I didn't say anything else. I walked back to my car and I sat in Patty's driveway and I went through every card. Near the back of the box, behind the divider labeled Desserts, there was a piece of notebook paper, folded in quarters, slightly yellowed at the edges. A list written in pencil in Evelyn's handwriting. It went back to October 2019, every visit I had made. Date, what we'd done, sometimes a small additional note. October 14, 2019, Renee drove up. We made Brunswick stew together. She cleaned out the gutters without my asking, stayed until 8, left flowers from the farmer's market. February 7, 2021, Renee came. Sorted all the prescriptions into the weekly organizer. Sat with me through The Price is Right. Brought coffee cake from that bakery on South Tryon. Left flowers again. March 20, 2022, Renee called this morning. She sounded tired, but she didn't let on. We talked for an hour and 12 minutes. She asked the right questions. 51 entries. 4 years of drives and medication organizers and errands run without being asked, and phone calls that happened because they mattered, not because anyone was watching. I sat in that car in Patty's driveway and I wept. Not only because of the money, though I will not pretend the money was nothing. It was not nothing. $147,000 to a 34-year-old clinical social worker making $67,000 a year is not nothing. It is a down payment on a house. It is a financial cushion that reshapes every decision I make for the next decade. It is security in a form I had never expected to have, but it was the list that broke me open. The list. That she had sat down with her pencil and her notebook paper, while being managed and isolated and slowly enclosed by people who saw her primarily as an estate to be organized, and written my name, and what I had done, and what she had noticed. That she had done this 51 times over 4 years, and kept it in the one place she knew nobody would search. That she had planned all of it, from the taxi to Gerald Whitmore's office, to the sequencing of the will reading to the slanted cursive on the outside of that Miss Manila envelope. She had orchestrated the entire thing from inside a situation where she supposedly had no agency, Because Evelyn May Caldwell was never without agency, not for a single day of her 81 years. She saw me. She saw me all along, and she found a way to make sure I knew it. What happened in the Caldwell family after March 14th is not a story I tell often, because it is still unresolved in the way that family ruptures are always unresolved. But you came here for the whole thing, and I'm going to give it to you. Patty found out about the trust account 3 weeks after the reading, when Gerald Whitmore's office filed the necessary paperwork with Wake County. She called my father in a state that he described carefully as the worst conversation he'd had in 30 years. She accused me of manipulating Evelyn in her final years. She said I had exploited an elderly woman's sentimental attachment. She said the account rightfully belonged to the estate and that she was consulting an attorney. She did consult an attorney. She was told the same thing Gerald Whitmore had already told me. A Totten Trust properly established and funded during the grantor's lifetime transfers outside of probate, independently of the will, and is not subject to estate distribution. The trust was legally clean on every dimension. There was nothing Patty could do. She then attempted something more personal. She composed a letter and sent it to the extended Caldwell family. Cousins, second cousins, people I hadn't seen since my grandfather's funeral in 1989, describing me as someone who had manipulated Evelyn and worked against family's unity, and asking whether my behavior reflected the values that Charles and Evelyn Caldwell had built the family on. My father sat at his kitchen table in Greensboro for 2 evenings after that letter went out. He wrote a 4-page response. He described every visit I had made over 3 years. He detailed the drives, the medication management, the doctor communications, the Sunday calls that had continued without interruption for over 2 decades. He attached a photocopy of Evelyn's handwritten list from the recipe card box. He sent it to the same distribution. I found out about my dad's letter when my cousin Dana, who lives in Virginia, sent me a text message that said, "Your dad just emailed everyone. I think I owe you an apology." Bryce called me once, about 6 weeks after the trust became known. I almost didn't answer. I answered because I believe in communication even when I don't want to have it. It's a professional disposition that bleeds into personal life whether you want it to or not. Bryce said he didn't know what his mother had been doing. He said it quietly, without defensiveness, which surprised me. He said he thought his grandson was fine, that everyone was fine, that whatever Patty was arranging was just what she did, and he'd never looked at it closely enough to see the shape of it. He said, "My mom's not a bad person, Renee. I just want you to know that." I said, "I know she loves your grandmother. I know she loves your family." I paused. "That's not the same thing as what happened." He didn't have an answer for that. We haven't spoken since, but the call wasn't hostile. It was 2 people who grew up in the same family trying to talk to each other across a gap that neither of us knew how to close. I don't hate Bryce. I never have. Patty and I have not spoken since the afternoon I stood on her porch and took the recipe card box. My dad has had 3 brief conversations with her in the 14 months since March 14th. They're strained and logistical, and leave him tired in a way that's hard to watch. He told me at Thanksgiving last year that he believes Patty has genuinely convinced herself of her own version of events, that she was protecting her mother, that the estate was fairly divided, that I created a problem where one didn't need to exist. He said it with a weariness that I recognized as the specific exhaustion of loving someone through a fundamental disagreement about what actually happened. I know that weariness. I've felt it myself. I started working with a therapist in April 2023. Her name is Dr. Amara Osibonsu, and she practices at Carolina Wellness Partners on East Boulevard in Charlotte. We have spent the past year working through the specific layered grief that this kind of loss produces. Not just the loss of Evelyn herself, which is enormous and real and ongoing, but the loss of the family I believed I had. The family where everyone is dying, even if unevenly. The family where Patty's controlling tendencies were just a personality trait and not a systematic strategy. Losing that version of things hurts in a way that is different from losing a person. It's the loss of a story you'd been living inside without knowing it was a story. That work has been the most important investment I've made in years. Has therapy, or a journal, or a single conversation with the right person at exactly the right moment ever helped you see something about your own family that you'd been refusing to see? Something that was painful to finally understand, but that also felt like setting down a weight you hadn't realized you'd been carrying. Leave a comment. I read every single one. And if you've been putting it off, I'd just say this gently. The right therapist is worth every dollar and every hour of every session you give them. It is May 2024. I close on a house in the Optimist Park neighborhood of Charlotte on June 15th. 3 bedrooms, 1,450 square feet, built in 1948. Hardwood floors throughout, original to the house, refinished once in 2011 and still sound. The down payment is $73,000, drawn from the trust account Evelyn May Caldwell, built for me in quiet monthly increments over 4 months, from his inside a life that other people thought they were controlling. The kitchen has a gas range and a deep farmhouse sink and a window above it that looks out into the backyard, where 2 dogwood trees stand about 8 feet apart. I was in that kitchen last week while the home inspector walked through the rest of the house, and I stood at that window and I thought about Evelyn's kitchen on Oberlin Road. The particular slant of afternoon light through the window over her sink, the smell of cornmeal and coffee, the sound of the phone ringing at 11 on a Sunday morning, exactly when it was supposed to. I thought about a woman who called a taxi at 80 years old, alone, and rode it to a law office on Glenwood Avenue, and sat in the waiting room with my name on a notepad she had hidden in her bedroom, and made sure that whatever happened to her in the years to come, her Sunday girl would be protected. I thought about how much courage that took. Not the loud, declarative kind of courage, the quiet, methodical kind. The kind that keeps a list in a recipe card box for 4 years because it knows the box is the one place nobody will think to look. The cast iron skillet is on the burner of my current apartment stove on Commonwealth Avenue. It is older than I am. It belonged to Evelyn's mother, which puts it somewhere in the 1950s or earlier, possibly before that. It has been seasoned for 7 decades. When you cook in a pan that old, nothing sticks. I have made cornbread in it 3 times since February 2023. The recipe is on an index card in Evelyn's handwriting, filed under breads, with a note at the bottom that says, "Don't skip the cast iron, it makes the crust." She was right about that. She was right about most things when you got down to it. Marcus moved in with me 6 months ago. He is steady and warm and was present for every single piece of this. He drove to Raleigh and back twice in the final 18 months in Evelyn's life, just to sit with me while I tried to untangle what I was feeling and what I was allowed to do about it. He has strong opinions about cornbread, specifically that it should be significantly sweeter than Evelyn's recipe calls for. And we have an ongoing disagreement about this that I intend maintain for the rest of our lives together. He knows. He reads the whole situation with the precision of someone who tracks numbers for a living. He calls what Patty did reallocation of affection as estate strategy, and says it without judgment but also without softening it, which is exactly how I need it said. My dad came to Charlotte for Easter. He and my mom drove down from Greensboro, and my dad stood in the kitchen of the house I'm about to close on. I'd taken him to see it, and he looked out at the dogwood trees in the backyard for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "Your grandmother knew exactly what she was doing." And I said, "I know, Dad." And he said, "She always did." We stood there for a while after that, the two of us, in the quiet of a kitchen that isn't mine yet but is almost mine, looking at 2 dogwood trees in afternoon light. I think about Evelyn every day. I think about the slanted cursive and the Sunday calls, and the way she pressed cash into cards with instructions not to spend it sensibly. I think about her sitting in Gerald Whitmore's waiting room, Alone, by taxi, at 80 years old, with my name on a notepad, and holding steady in the particular way she held steady, which was quietly and completely, and without making a show of it. I think about what she said at the kitchen table in October 2022, the last time I sat across from her. I need you to know that I see you, Renee. I see exactly who you are. I understand now that it wasn't sentiment. It was a promise. The kind of promise that gets kept across a law office table with a sealed manila envelope and 6 handwritten pages and a list in pencil in the back of a recipe card box. Behind the divider that says, Desserts, she kept it. If you have ever been the person who showed up when no one was watching, who did the invisible work, who loved someone completely and consistently, and without requiring an audience, I want you to hear this. Sometimes the people who love us most are limited in what they can show while they're still here. Sometimes protection looks like patience. Sometimes being seen happens across a distance you didn't know existed, in a form you weren't expecting, later than you needed it to happen. It doesn't always arrive. I know that. I am not naive enough to suggest that every story like mine ends the way mine did. Some of you have shown up for people who had nothing left and nothing hidden and no Gerald Whitmore waiting with a manila envelope. That grief is real, and I don't want to minimize it by telling you what happened to me. But if you are in the middle of your version of this right now, if you are the one making the drives and managing the medications and taking the calls, and nobody seems to see it, I want to leave. You with the one thing I know for certain. Evelyn May Caldwell didn't wait until she was gone to start seeing me. She saw me the whole time. She just had to find a way to make sure I knew. What would you have done sitting in that attorney's office when everyone else filed out and Gerald Whitmore reached for that envelope with your name on it? I've been sitting with that question for over a year, and I still don't know if I have a complete answer. Leave it in the comments. Tell me what you would have felt, what you would have thought, what you would have needed to hear in that moment. I read every single comment, always have, always will. And if any piece of this story stayed with you, if it found something in you that needed to be found, check the description. There are more stories there. Every one of them is told by someone who finally got to speak for herself.